I hold the suckling child in my hands, a knife at his throat, and know that all who live wish me to let the blade slip, spill its blood upon the ground over my hands, and with it gain us further breath to draw. Hey you geeks! A lot of people, myself included, love to talk about how contemporary fantasy authors like Brandon Sanderson subvert tropes in his writing. Now, tropes are to stories what carbon is to life on Earth. If we don't got it, we've got nothing. So I don't mind when I recognize tropes in a story, provided they don't detract from the media. Now, great authors, like Sanderson, are known for taking these tropes and approaching them from new directions, sort of hiding the tropes in plain view, giving theorists like me stuff to unearth for your viewing pleasure. Now, when it comes to the greatest tropes at play in Wind and Truth, I'd say they're all spouting from and leading to the Duel of the Champions. What are those tropes, and where did they come from?
And now, my cousin Hamlet, and my son.
A little more than kin and less than kind.
Those who saw my Murtagh review will not be surprised when I say the tropes come from C.S. Lewis, followed by Shakespeare with just a hint of Dostoevsky to keep it interesting. I find it quite telling that Sanderson did not give us Elhokar or Gavinor's perspective in the entire front five, because if we were to see things from their point of view, we would have recognized a story that is very, very familiar and always begins with
the death of the king.
Is he sick?
Zeph, Son Villano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was to kill a king. Now, the death of a king is a rather natural way to begin a story of the next generation, especially when playing by the rules of Primogeniture. But if we're going to really see this from the whole Shakespearean tragedy perspective, we have to remember that from Elhokar's perspective, his father Gavilar was a great king, an honorable man, and that unwittingly his uncle Dalinar gives him the impression that he will never fill those shoes, as we saw in their first scene in The Way of Kings. Dalinar smiled. I felt like a youth again, chasing after your father on some ridiculous challenge. Elhokar's lips tightened to a thin line, and the glory spren faded away. Mentioning Gavilar soured him. He felt others compared him unfavorably to the old king. Unfortunately, he was often right. Because Gavilar was an honorable man, or so he wanted the world to believe, but we the reader know better. But Elhokar did not. He was given a lie to live up to, and unsurprisingly, failed. All the while, Elhokar feels that his power over the kingdom is slipping away into his uncle's or Sadeas's control. And to top it all off, he starts seeing visions of eldritch horrors in the mirrors, attracted by the lies he's telling himself.
The spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin.
Can you imagine if Hamlet's uncle just barged in on this scene to beat the ever-loving snot out of Hamlet and then tell him that he was taking even more control of the kingdom and that he was, enamored with Hamlet's mother? There'd be no question that Hamlet's uncle was evil. This is basically what I imagine little Gavinor saw for so much of his time growing up in the spiritual realm. Now, while we, the audience, know that Elhokar and Hamlet were kind of whiny brats, indecisive and annoying, but Gavinor had been told that his father was an honorable man. Gavinor had been told that his father was a good king. He was also told that his father's only success as a king was to form a vengeance pack and root out the evil people who had killed his father. So it's no wonder that even before he fell into Odium's clutches, Gavinor's idea of a good, honorable task was to seek vengeance. "If I have a sword," Gav said, "nobody will be able to hurt me. I'll be able to find the man who killed my father, and I could kill him." Navani felt a chill unrelated to the cold air. On one hand, it was a very Alethi thing to say. It broke her heart regardless. She hugged Gav tight. "Don't worry about it." Alas, if Navani had been looking for a prime teachable moment about true honor, that was it. And she blew it. To be fair, Navani does do some good mothering of Gav during Wind and Truth, but that might seem to be too little too late, for she tells Gav to judge people by their actions. And unfortunately for Navani, her actions sort of indicate that she's the evil queen. Now, Hamlet's uncle's villainy goes beyond merely seizing power at the death of the king, but also marrying Hamlet's mother. So in retellings that want to make the queen more sympathetic, like Disney's Lion King or Tollywood's Bahubali, they make the queen not into this arrangement whatsoever.
It's over. There is nothing left.
So when we view Navani's actions through Odium's lens, what does that look like? She who would throw over her relationship with the Elokar and Gavinor's grandfather, to be with his brother, in defiance of all propriety, custom, and causing a rift in the Vorin church itself. Dalinar closed his eyes. How can this work? We'll find a way. We'll be denounced. The devotaries can say what they wish, but the arguments do not forbid our union. Tradition is not the same as doctrine. And I will not hold myself back for fear of offending. We, the readers, come to learn that Gavilar was an awful husband, but apparently was an honorable man. Now, if Odium did his homework to dig up all of Yasna's dirty little secrets from the night of Gavilar's assassination, then I would be shocked if he failed to mention to little Gav, his pupil, that Navani prayed for Gavilar's death on the very night of his assassination.
If once a widow ever, I be wife.
Madam, how like you this play?
The lady doth protest too much, methinks.
He did at least trick Navani into abandoning her beloved son Elokar right before little Gav's eyes. "Navani!" Elokar's voice called after her. "Mother? Mother, help me!" Her blood turned cold as she heard Odium shifting his tone to mimic Elokar's, pleading for help amid the screaming and fighting soldiers. Life before death. Gav was alive. Behind her was only death. Activated, she hissed at the simulacrum of Kaladin beside her. He hadn't frozen in battle this time, as he'd followed her instead of staying to fight. Now, Navani told Gav to judge things by their actions, by the fruit of their works. And the fruit that Gavinor sees in his final interactions with his grandpa and grandma is them beating up and abandoning his father to certain doom. So it's no wonder that Dalinar comes across to little Gav as the evil uncle. The evil uncle trope has been quite pervasive in contemporary fantasy and fairy stories that it was even added redundantly and ridiculously to the adaptation of Ella Enchanted that doesn't exist. So it's interesting to see how it arrives in English literature via the historical record of Richard III looking out for his nephews by keeping them safely in a tower, which didn't end well. And then Shakespeare wrote a play about it.
It didn't end well.
When we first meet Dalinar in The Way of Kings, he is also an honorable man, a man of principle, whose principles are chiefly geared towards not becoming the evil uncle he has secretly always known he's wanted to be, at least ever since that one time on the battlefield facing down Gavilar with the thrill in his veins. There was the man who held what he wanted, a throne and more, the woman Dalinar should have been able to claim, a love he'd been forced to abandon. For what reason? Oh, Stormfather, Dalinar thought, what am I doing? Never again, he swore to himself. I give way for Gavilar in all things. Let him have the throne. Let him have love. I must never be king. And yet, by the end of Oathbringer, Dalinar has effectively, taken both of those things. Now, we know that Dalinar did not intentionally kill his nephew. However, his track record ain't so hot. Even in Words of Radiance, he left Elokar alone in the hands of would-be assassins who intended to put Dalinar on the throne of Elokar, and only because Kaladin actually realized that Dalinar wanted Elokar to be protected was Elokar's life spared. Now, if it took Kaladin, an more or less unbiased viewer who had an objective perspective on all the ins and outs of the Colin family, then what hope does Gavinor have looking back on these events through the lens of Odium's bias? Not to mention, he's also seen that Dalinar is completely capable of destroying the ones he says he loves. After all, Gab saw what happened to Evie. Grandpa? Gavinor said, his voice growing shrill. What's happening? It's all right, Evie said. As I told you, child, my husband will come for us. The Blackthorn? The man said, yawning. He doesn't care if we rot. No, Evie said. My husband is a good man. Not this, Dalinar thought. Anything but this. The door shook, suddenly. He could hear it. The distant screams that had once been a constant accompaniment to his life. The sounds of a city burning. Thus Gavinor could believe that Dalinar loved Elokar, yet still sent him to his death to go retrieve the city of Kholinar. While we, the readers, know that Elokar was just doing what Kholins do, running off towards a challenge headlong without thinking clearly, and damnation to the consequences. Elokar perked up. Yes, I'll do it, Uncle. I'll take a team and reclaim our home. Aesudan is there. Dalinar certainly hadn't been intending Elokar to go on this mission himself. Consequences. The lad was earnest, as he'd always been. Besides, Elokar seemed to have learned something from his near-death experience at the hands of assassins. It is fitting, Dalinar said, that their king should be the one who saves them. I will see that you have whatever resources you need, Elokar. Dalinar was trying to support Elokar's kingship, and yet somehow Elokar ended up dead. Now, Dalinar did not take officially the throne of Alethkar at that time. Rather, despite knowing that Gavinor was very much alive, he passed it first to Adolin, then to Yasna. The Blackthorn shook his head, then looked to Shallan and Adolin. Either way, Alethkar needs a king. More so now than ever. The heir, Adolin began, too young. This isn't the time for a regency. Gavinor can be named your heir, Adolin, but we must see you two married and the monarchy secured, for the good of Alethkar, but also the world. Now, we as readers who have been in Jasnah's head know that she isn't interested in producing heirs to usurp Gavinor's rightful throne, but I don't think he knew that, especially with Odium giving him selected information. Besides, it speaks volumes that Dalinar was the one who decided the fate of the throne, even if he did not take it himself. By the time books 4 and 5 roll around, Navani observes when talking to the remaining Alethi nobility, they hadn't failed to notice that, after years of politicking, almost everyone who had opposed Dalinar was now dead. Rumors about what had really happened to Sadeas churned, for all that Jasnah worked behind the scenes to quash them. And this is where C.S. Lewis crops up, for in addition to this mirroring reality and history and Shakespearean tragedy, Dalinar's playbook also mirrors that of the evil King Miraz in Prince Caspian, the novel, as Prince Caspian, the character's tutor, points this out to him about his uncle. And then, one by one, all the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. Not by accident either. Miraz weeded them out. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he had instructed them, begged him to become king. And of course he did. Now, to their credit, both Miraz and Dalinar had beneficently volunteered to house their dear nephews and heirs in giant towers, because that always turns out so well. The once king of Alethkar. Now, Prince Caspian and Prince Gavinor are actually quite similar characters. Both are young boys when their story begins, who are the rightful kings of their realms, but that realm is currently being ruled by their beneficent uncle. As Prince Caspian's tutor tells him, as long as he had no children of his own, he was willing enough that you should be king after he died. He may not have cared much about you, but he would rather you should have the throne than a stranger. You are in the way. He'll clear you out of the way. Is he really as bad as that? Said Caspian. Would he really murder me? He murdered your father, said Dr. Cornelius. I can very much imagine Taravangian having a similar conversation with young Gavinor. Not to mention that Prince Caspian, like Gavinor, is the heir to the throne of the people who invaded a magical land from another world, and then in their bright new musical world, hunted and destroyed a lot of what was magical about it. Though Caspian is put on the right path because he, by his secret tutor, comes to understand the plight of the old magic folk. Caspian and his tutor had many more secret conversations on top of the great tower, and at each conversation, Caspian learned more about old Narnia, so that thinking and dreaming about the old days and longing that they might come back filled nearly all his spare hours. But of course he had not many hours to spare, for now his education was beginning in earnest. Again, I really feel like this passage could easily describe what was happening to young Gavinor as well in the spiritual realm, at the top of the tower, tutored by Odium himself. Due to the film adaptation casting His Royal Hotness, it's very easy to overlook that in the book, Caspian was originally 13, which is still older than Gavinor's 5, but he was a 13-year-old waging war against his evil uncle. However, with the good counsel of the Pevensey siblings who arrived just in time to help Narnia in its darkest hour again, they decide to minimize casualties and offer his uncle a duel.
So you're bravely refusing to fight a swordsman half your age.
You know what's really great for Narnia? That they just have supernatural heroes from another world swoop in to save the day on a regular basis to save Narnia in its darkest hour. Like, it would really stink for Narnia if those poor British children carried the mental strain of what all this time warping is doing to them. Not to mention if they shared in Diggory's guilt from ringing the bell on Charn and bringing that ancient evil directly into Narnia itself right after its creator had sung it into a new perfect existence. Yeah, that would suck for Narnia, but it sure would be interesting. I wish someone would write a series like that. Anyway, back to Gavinor. He, as a small child, is still thirsting, like Zeth was also in Wind and Truth, for these simple answers. Taravangian fed Gavinor the narrative that was easy to believe because it made him the enactor of vengeance, the hero of the story. "I watched you beat him senseless," Gav shouted. "I watched you kill your wife. I watched you burn that city. For 20 years, I remembered." His voice softened. "I remembered my father in your hands, terrified." He raised Oathbringer again. "I will take this kingdom for myself, in the name of my father, in the name of Alethkar." And what boy wouldn't want to believe that? Literary theft. By the end of Wind and Truth, even that lovely narrative Odium painted for young Gavinor has begun to show strain. First, Odium interrupts the duel and doesn't let Gavinor follow through on his heroic epic quest. Rather, he offers him up to Dalinar as a lamb ready for the slaughter. "Here is my champion," Taravangian said softly. "Legally chosen and provided by the appointed time. I cannot fix the fight against you, but there's no prohibition against me fixing it for you. This ends when you decide. Kill him while he watches, or forfeit and die by your own hand." This is a truly odious proposition, but also to me, Taravangian sounds a lot like Ivan Karamazov after he got totally dumped by Katerina. He gets drunk, then blabbers to his brother, first about how unfair it is that children must die in this cruel world. A lot like Taravangian's first interlude, actually. And then Ivan goes on to blather some incomprehensible nonsense about retribution. That lands differently when you're rereading it for a video script now. And then finally, Ivan offers Alyosha this ultimatum, this option to create a perfect, beautiful world, hypothetically. Imagine that you are building the edifice of human destiny with the object of making people happy in the finale, of giving them peace and rest at last. But for that, you must inevitably and unavoidably torture just one tiny creature, that same child beating its breast with its fist, for instance, and raise your edifice on its unrequited tears. Would you consent to be the architect on those conditions? Tell me, and tell the truth. "No, I wouldn't consent," said Alyosha softly. Such a clear and precise ultimatum that Taravangian offers Dalinar is quite acceptable to honor. However, we have yet to find out exactly how acceptable this was to Gavinor, the proverbial suckling child, offered up on the platter for the perfect salvation of Alethkar, his own kingdom. Moreover, Gavinor is also going to have to square with the fact that his uncle did not, in the end, kill him for the good of all humanity. Instead, his uncle refused to choose and offered himself up as a human shield to protect Gavinor. Dalinar died embracing the one who would kill him. This is actually a brilliant use of, again, literary theft from the brothers Karamazov. For after Ivan gets through his wonderful poem about the Grand Inquisitor, he offers his brother Alyosha a similar ultimatum. The formula, all is lawful, I won't renounce. Will you renounce me for that? Yes? Ivan said. Alyosha got up, went to him, and softly kissed him on the lips. Literary theft! Cried Ivan, highly delighted. You stole that from my poem. Thank you, though. So, when I call The End of Wind and Truth literary theft, I'm not calling Sanderson unoriginal. I'm being unoriginal and copying wholesale what Ivan says to the same actions in The Brothers Karamazov. Rather, I find Sanderson brilliant for weaving these narratives and tropes together and introducing them to us from the other side in forming a single narrative arc that ends
The death of the king
at Dalinar's death, but also Gavinor's beginning as he looks out on a brave new world. A man stood on a cliffside and watched his homeland fall into dust. The waters surged beneath, so far beneath, and he heard a child crying. They were his own tears. With Dalinar dead, will honor demand that Gavinor be given Alethkar's rule? Is that how Renarin ends up with those high-ranking robes of fused style and back in his own bedroom? I suppose we will find out, like Gavinor, in 20 years, or slightly less. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye! Also check out my Patreon